Let's put on the old pop filter. I'll do a quick mic check. Mic check real quick. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. I'm going to let things cook for a second while I edit up this tier list, and we're going to get rocking real fast. I didn't even add my files. Let's do that real quick. Look at all my little icons. All right, we got this one, this one, this one. What is happening? Whoa, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. I know I'm missing something. I'm gonna have to reset this. Alrighty, let me see. Why did it duplicate like that? So that before it was working. I don't know. That. So we got those three. What am I missing? The Resto Druid, Resto Shaman. Yeah. Yep. No, not Resto Druid. Resto Shaman and Priest is what I'm missing. We'll do this as an icon, and we'll do this one as an icon. And you know what? Just to help differentiate things, let's do this one too, just to show. And then I could just edit this. I'll probably just use the same ones all as my tank one. All around best, probably. Then A tier is amazing. Then B tier is pretty good. C tier, we'll call that one serviceable. I know I had it different in my tank one. And I'll just put could be stronger. And then D tier. D tier, I'll put need to see more because again, we don't have all of the pieces. There we go. That looks fine. Now I'm just gonna get comfy. This is gonna be one of them ones where we break down a lot, so. I think make sure I got all my side stuff active. Okay. All right. So, as promised yesterday, I said I would be doing the healer tier list. This is in the same vein as the tank tier list that I did maybe 2 weeks ago or last week. I don't remember. But yeah, this is going to be based on everything we know thus far. So that's why I put speculative in the title. This is not me stamping anything or saying everything that I say today in the stream is definitive. This is straight up what we have, what we can do, what we using the information we have, my opinions on it after looking at all the changes and stuff like that. So I'm going to go through all the healer specs and where I think their strengths, their weaknesses lie, and where I think they're going to fall within the level 25 bracket. Obviously, this is subject to change because as we get stronger, as we get more runes, things unlock, we become better. But I do want to start out with, I think probably for me, when I was doing this, the hardest healer to tier, and that's the priest. And the priest to me was the hardest one because it has 2 healing specs, but realistically in vanilla, Disc didn't have its identity just yet. Now, a lot of the runes kind of give it that identity, right? Because you got to understand, Disc didn't have, disregarding runes for a second, Disc didn't have penance, It didn't have Divine Aegis. It didn't have the Grace talent. It didn't have Power Word Barrier. It didn't have Atonement. It didn't have all of the little things that really made kind of disc known. You know what I mean? Because no matter what you spec, you could always get Power Word Shield. You could always use your Power Word Shield, right? So that really wasn't a staple thing for the disc tree. And I think, and this is just me speculating, I think what disc was supposed to be, and I'm talking about for like 2004 a while, I think disc was supposed to be like the holy, like it's like, what is it? It's like the precursor to augmentation. If you play retail, augmentation is the first support spec that we've seen where its utility isn't based off of how much damage it does, even though it's considered a DPS spec. It's really based around how the uptime you have on the buffs that you give to your fellow players. And you can kind of see little inklings of that in the disc tree, like when you look at the talent tree. But I kind of think disc is like the precursor to that, because even if you went, like if you invested all of your talent points at level 60 in original or 2019 classic, if you invested all of your talent points, or the majority of them, into the discipline tree, you're still using holy spells. You're still using heal, greater heal, flash heal, or flash light, whatever. No, it's flash heal, not flash of light. You're still using those spells, which are considered holy spells, to really get the job done. You know what I mean? So while disc did have certain things in its tree that was indicative to it, some of that stuff you could still get while still getting the like healing amplified talents in the holy tree. So disc's identity was kind of weird. So it was kind of tough to tier priest, because even if you put the majority of your talents in the disc tree, you still were just kind of a holy priest, to be quite honest. But I'll say with Season of Discovery and some of the runes that you get, this kind of gets its identity back a little bit. And I'll pull this over to the side here so we can see. There we go. So if you look at some of the runes, you can see they have things like Strength of Soul, which kind of serves as like an improved Weakened Soul talent. Like later on in WoW's further expansions, there's a talent that reduces like the duration of Weakened Soul. This is kind of like that. It doesn't reduce the duration, but when you heal someone with one of the listed spells, it reduces the duration by 4 seconds. So that can kind of be disc centric. I would say this should have been like, if the spells are lesser heal, greater heal, and flash heal, I feel like maybe take off lesser heal and maybe include penance in that. Even though penance is a rune, you don't want to really tie one rune to another. But I feel like that would have been more disc centric. But I can understand why they wouldn't, because you want to be able to do this regardless, right? Like a Shadow Priest can do this, right? They can power shield themselves. If they really need the cooldown off, they can throw out a flash heal on themselves to reduce the duration of Weakened Soul. So they could do that, but I feel like penance should have been added to this list. That's just my opinion. But Strength of Soul is something that kind of, you think about disc priest when you see this one. Like same thing with penance. Penance is obviously a disc talent. Like it's in the future iterations of WoW, it's a disc talent. And then you have Powered Barrier, which was the Cataclysm capstone talent for disc. So disc does get some of its identity by virtue of some of the runes that you can take. So that was you can see kind of what Blizzard's trying to do. They don't want the full, I mean, to my knowledge, they don't want the full absorb healer, like where disc is kind of the way it works on Wrath, where you're just blanketing the raid in bubbles, which you could still do effectively. You could do it, but it's just a little harder because Holy still has the powered shield talent too, so, or ability too. So it's a little weird, but I'm going to start with Priest, and I think it's weird because, as I just said before, you're still using majority holy spells, especially in the level 25 bracket. I can't really say you're a quote-unquote disc priest, but for the purpose of this stream, I'm gonna separate the two. I'm gonna use holy. I'm gonna use holy as one spec, and I'm gonna use disc as another. Even though I feel like I just moved it somewhere. Let me just bring it back up. Even though, like in this talent build, I have the primary talents in the discipline tree. This isn't a real build. This is just something I put up just so I could see all of the spells that you were able to get at the level 25 bracket. So this isn't a real build. But if you did go this route and want to put the majority or maybe even all of your 16 points in the disc tree, you still get things like improved fortitude and improved power word shield. You can't get divine spirit yet. You can't get power infusion yet, but you can still get these two amps to your pretty common pre-spells, and you still get inner focus, which is really disc centric. But even with this setup, you're still using holy abilities, but you don't have some of the holy stuff. So we'll say disc is its own thing. I would say disc probably lands in the pretty good spot. Like I said, you still have the things that that holy has, and you can still use runes like Circle of Healing, like Prayer of Mending, things of that nature, things that are more akin to holy. You can still use them. But if you want to pride yourself as that priest, as the disc priest who's bringing the improved versions of fortitude and disc, and you're going to use strength of soul, you're going to use penance, you're going to use powered barrier as the mainstay, as your spec for disc, I would say using all of those things combined, you're probably in a pretty good spot, because disc still does reduce damage. Like, no other healer really can reduce damage like a disc priest can, just because no other healer has consistent absorbs like powered shield. So even as holy, like, yeah, you can use powered shield, but you're still going to want to heal stuff. So I would say disc probably falls under the pretty good spot. I will say this, without talents like Improved Weakened Soul and Divine Aegis and Grace, disc might fall behind if there are a lot of fights that require just straight up throughput. Like if there's fights that have like AoE ticking damage, like just rot damage for the raid group, I can see disc being okay, because you'll be shielding everybody, you'll be lowering that damage number. But if there's just levels of burst healing that's needed, and you're speccing the strength of soul, the penance, and barrier, even if you swap out barrier for prayer mending, you're still going to be at a little bit of a disadvantage when it comes to healing, just raw healing. So that might knock disc priest into the serviceable category, just dependent on the style of fights we see. And then I would say at that point it could be stronger, but I think for the most part disc is just pretty good. And then that leaves holy. So with holy priest, like, and I kind of had to do some back research for this one, because I think I've said this. Not even I know I said this before. I haven't played vanilla, so I had to kind of do some research and to figure out, all right, what was kind of considered the best healer for Season of Mastery for 2019 and stuff like that. And priest always came up as maybe not the best healer for every single encounter, but definitely like the most versatile. It could single target heal pretty well. It could triage heal pretty well. It could AoE heal pretty well. It just was a good healer. It scaled well with gear. It was just a really good healer. So I guess when you can just do things like, as an example, if the Paladin is the best single target healer, right? And maybe priest can't single target heal as well as a Paladin, but you could do it just as good, and you can do a whole bunch of other stuff that kind of puts you in a category above, in a class of your own. So I could see why priest kind of got the nod as the best healer, because it, rather than falling into one niche, it kind of put his hand in a whole bunch of things. So that's not the only reason. That's reason number one of why I'm about to tier where I'm about to go with it. And then if you look at I'm going to keep dragging this thing back and forth. If you look at some of the rune choices that you take as a holy priest, right? So Serendipity is a really good throughput rune. Let me just put so I don't have to keep clicking. Let's just do this and this. So if you use this rune combo, right? You have Serendipity, of Circle of Healing, you have Prayer of Mending. So with Circle of Healing and Prayer of Mending, this makes you really mobile. You can cast Circle of Healing while moving because it's instant. It does. I think this iteration does have the 6-second CD. Yeah, it's not the TBC version where it's instant and no cooldown. That would be kind of nutty. But it's still instant. It heals a lot. It heals, your party, a party within 40 yards. You can cast it on a move. Good to go. Same thing with Prayer of Mending. Prayer of Mending, though, doesn't just work on the party. It works on the raid as well, and it's also instant, and it does a decent amount of healing. So Prayer of Mending is a button that is also a really good versatile button. It's just lending more to the priest strengths. And then you have, like I had mentioned in the first place, serendipity. So serendipity, when you use flash heal, it reduces the cast time of either lesser heal, heal, greater heal, or prayer of healing. So depending on what you need, depending on the fight situation, you can boost either your greater heal for a really fast single target heal, and greater heal is already a strong heal, or prayer of healing, which is an AoE heal, which again lends to holy priests being really good versatile healers. They have serendipity to cater towards single target or AoE healing. They have circle of healing for AoE healing, and prayer of mending, even though I consider it an AoE heal, quote unquote, this can kind of be looked at as a single target healer in certain scenarios. Like as an example, if like on a fight like Patchwork where it's only the tank, the off tank, and like the next highest threat person taking damage, prayer of mending is only going to bounce to those people. So you can kind of look at it as a single target / triage shield because it's just going to keep bouncing. You put it on one, tank gets hit, bounces to the off tank gets hit, bounces to the third next highest threat person, that person gets hit, it bounces back. And you can keep doing that. So the versatility of the Holy Priest should not be underestimated. And then if you look at some of the talents, I can reset this real quick so I don't get confused. They get a 5% crit from Holy Specialization. They get spell pushback protection. I had mentioned before that Improve Renew was kind of a trap talent because it only increases the base heal of Renew. It doesn't increase like the scaling rate of Renew. So even though like if you max it out, increasing, Renew's heal by 15% looks good. It's not really good. I'll stay here. What up, Cap? I had to get back with the stream, do the healer thing. But if you look at, okay, so they get 5% crit, they get spell pushback protection, they get Divine Fury, which further reduces the cast time on heal and greater heal, two of their most used spells. And then they get Inspiration, which is increasing your target, more than likely your tank, their armor by 25%. Very, very strong talent here. So, and then they have one floater talent. You can put in Holy Nova, you can put in Spell Warding, whatever have you. But you can put in Improve Healing to reduce the mana cost. But this setup right here is really good for healing plus these runes. So I think the Holy Priest might not get knocked down as, once Season of Discovery is, over and stuff like that. Or at least maybe not over. Once Season of Discovery ends the level 25 level cap, Priest might be considered the best. But I think here, until I'm able to review it all, I'm going to put them in the Amazing tier because they are very versatile. And I put them in the Amazing tier because I still don't know, none of us know, nobody knows the type of damage we're going to be taking primarily for Black Fathom Depths. We saw a couple bosses, but that was a demo and things can be changed. So I don't know just yet how much of a versatile heal is going to be necessarily needed. As an example, if let's say the first boss, the second boss, and the third boss are all just spot healing fights, the Paladin really shines. Even though the Priest can do it, that's more of a Paladin thing. That's more of a Disc Priest thing. So we'll see. Time will tell. But I think for now, I'd put them in the Amazing tier, or I guess what was considered the A tier for now. Let me move this back over here. And before I continue, so now that I got that out the way, like that was like the hardest one. Like the Priest was the hardest one to kind of figure out because Disc is still trying to, like they're trying to give Disc the identity without making it too strong. But they're still kind of going to be using, unless you use that rune setup, like this, you're still going to be using just holy runes for the most part, or holy spells. But one thing I actually definitely have to look into is this. So this is the latest. Let me just move this over. This is the latest in rune changes they've done for Season of Discovery. I kind of shrunk all the classes that weren't healers. And looking at Priest, so I was just on it. So they changed Circle of Healing from 15 to 40. Big amp. 15 yards. I think 15 yards would have been okay. 40 plays better into bigger raid groups, in my opinion. So this kind of tells me that at some point we're going to see bigger raid groups. I know that's a big question on everyone's mind. Like, yo, what's the are we going to stay with 10 man? Blizzard already announced that they're going to, at the level 60 level ban, they're going to introduce not the older raids, but the actual 60 raids. We still just don't know what size it's going to be. Is it going to be 40 man? Is it going to be 25? I don't know if it's going to be 40. I don't think it's going to be 40, to be quite honest with you. It could be, but I don't think they're gonna go 40. But anyway, looking at the rune changes, I had to take into consideration where I was putting this stuff at. So the range increase on Circle of Healing is pretty big, and this I think is let me highlight it. This is a slept on change. So actually not the whole thing. This part. Your powered shield target will still gain rage even if the damage is absorbed. Righteous Fury will trigger damage even if as if it were a heal. So this is really for tanking. This is a tank thing. Like, if you don't know, a common thing with like the rage tanks was if they didn't take damage, if you don't take damage, you can't generate rage. And if you had powered shield on you, you were obviously absorbing some damage, which means it was kind of harder to generate rage, especially for warriors. Like druids were kind of okay because they could generate rage without taking damage, but warriors were really kind of screwed there because they needed to take damage, they needed to block to generate rage, and if your damage is getting absorbed, you're kind of messing it up. So I do like this change. This didn't really sway my opinion in terms of tiering, but I just wanted to make note of it that this and other changes like this we're taking into consideration for tiering. So let's move on. All right, so the next healer I want to do is, I think I'm going to do the Resto Shaman. And the Shaman, in my opinion, I think was supposed to be a mirrored version of Paladin in some weird kind of way. Because if you look at like 2019 and Season of Mastery Shamans, and if you compare them to Paladins, like they kind of do the same stuff. One brings one set of buffs, one brings another set of buffs, right? And they're both powerful. Salve and Kings are really powerful. Wind Fury is really powerful. Grace of Air is really powerful. Strength of Earth is really powerful. So they each kind of brought their own unique buffing styles, and you always wanted a couple. So Shaman to me is kind of like the mirror of that. But Resto was, I think I gave Resto the edge a little bit, and not just for the tiering. I'm talking about for if I was playing vanilla back in 2019 or Season of Mastery, because Resto still has the ability Chain Heal, and Paladins don't have an AoE heal. They only have Flash of Light. Now, not that Flash of Light is an AoE heal, but it's a fast enough spell that you can cast it on one person, cast it on another person, cast it on another person, and you can kind of mimic AoE healing, if that makes sense. Pardon me, but Chain Heal was a 1 GCD, but like it was a heal off of 1 GCD that healed 4 targets. So when you have that, now it was reduced, like the effectiveness of Chain Heal was reduced if the raid had to spread out. So keep that in mind. And it's not like you were healing, the entire raid group. So Chain Heal still had its limits, but it still was a pretty solid group heal. But when it comes to Season of Discovery, Shamans, along with Paladins, we'll get there, have a couple of tricks, and we're going to go over real quick. Hold on. There we go. So looking at Shamans, they don't get Wind Fury at 25. So you have to wait on that. So that type of utility has to come elsewhere from a Druid, I would think, because the Druid cat and bear form with the Furious Strikes rune is, I think, the only way to get the Wind Fury effect at this level cap. So Shamans are missing a pretty important part of their utility. But when you look at the runes, we can kind of see, like, the big one is Healing Rain. So along with Chain Heal, now you have Healing Rain. And Healing Rain, I think, originally was introduced in Cataclysm. And it's basically just a circle you place on the ground. People who are standing within it take healing. And let me see if I can find the tooltip down here. Here it is. Now, it doesn't say that this version of Healing Rain has a cooldown, but I know for a fact Healing Rain has a cooldown. And I know for a fact it's not a 100-yard range. So some of that stuff in that tooltip has to get fixed, because you can't place Healing Rain just anywhere on the battlefield. That's not real. It does have a limit of how many people within the Healing Rain that it can heal. And in this case, it looks like it's 5 friendly party or raid members, which is big because, again, in vanilla, there's not too many abilities that heal both party and raid. Some, like Prayer of Mending, will jump between party and raid members, but Healing Rain is not one of those abilities. Healing Rain is one of those abilities. Certain abilities like Prayer of Healing only heal party only heal the target and the target's party, right? It doesn't heal the raid. It's not a smart heal yet. But Healing Rain is a smart heal, unless it gets changed. This is all speculation. This could all be changed by Thursday, but I'm just going off of what I see right now. Healing Rain is a pretty solid AoE heal because it heals party and raid members, which is really, really strong. On top of the fact that at this level bracket, shamans don't have chain heal just yet. So this is really your only way to get off some AoE healing. Now, Healing Rain was more so, in my opinion, powered by, when it was first introduced, it was powered by the Resto Shaman Mastery. Resto Shaman Mastery, in a nutshell, the lower health you had, the more powerful the Shaman's heals were on you. They don't have that amp in vanilla, so unless Healing Rain's scale rate is pretty high, you're probably not going to see a lot of, you're not going to see a lot of healing come from Healing Rain unless it's a fight like Sapphiron where it's just rot damage happening to the raid group and the shaman is consistently putting it down. But for sporadic moments of Healing Rain, you're probably not going to see a large amount of heals come from it, and you're probably still going to want to amplify it with spot healing. So as an example, if you are healing some sort of AoE heal or rot damage, you drop Healing Rain and you're still going to want to use lesser healing wave, things to supplement it. Healing Rain is not going to be able to just take care of it on itself. And I'm pretty sure they're going to put it on the cooldown. There's no way they just don't let it have a cooldown. So that's number 2. But Healing Rain is a very powerful AoE heal. Then we have, so in the Shaman video I think I said you'd probably see some lava burst usage when it comes to speedrunning and stuff like that. I think we're just going to talk about traditional healing here, so we're just going to pick up Water Shield because Resto Shaman is mana hungry. And then for the last slot, I don't know why I keep clicking off. For the last slot, you have a couple of options. You have Ancestral Guidance, you have Earth Shield, you have Shamanistic Rage, and you skip Way of the Earth. This gives Resto a lot of options. Earth Shield is pretty good because it's not a true external, but it's a consistent way for shamans to keep healing on the tanks GCD free. And one thing about Earth Shield, I don't know if it's going to work like this in vanilla, but I know in TBC, when it healed, the healing threat went to the tank. It didn't go to the shaman. So it was kind of a good little threat amp, so to speak. Don't know if it's going to work like that in vanilla. Hopefully, knock on wood, but only time will tell. But then they have Shamanistic Rage. So they recently changed Shamanistic Rage. Before, actually, I think I have the change. Where are my changes? Yeah, let's just put this over here. They recently changed Shamanistic Rage. Here it is. So reduces all damage you take by 20%, and you regenerate mana for every second for 15 seconds. So that's 15 ticks of mana regen. Mana is equal, in this case for a shaman, we'll just go with 6% of your healing power. And your party members within 40 yards will also receive 10% of the mana you receive this way. Pretty big. In my opinion, what this kind of works is like a poor man's Mana Tide totem, because obviously Mana Tide is the capstone talent. You can't get it just yet, but this kind of works that way. And the good thing about Shamanistic Rage, if we click it here, where is it? Shamanistic Rage is a 1 minute cooldown. So every minute you can give, depending on your healing power, a sizable amount of mana. And this might work if you put the shaman in the party with, like, let's say, some mana hungry people like Arcane mage or Arcane healer, right? Shamanistic Rage can help kind of fuel them. So I think that was a pretty decent change in my opinion. You can even put it, if you have mana tanks, you could put the shaman in a group with the mana tanks and give them a little bit of mana every minute or so. So it's pretty good cooldown, pretty good utility in my opinion. If you don't choose that, like I said, you can choose Earth Shield for a consistent external, so to speak, on the tank, or you can choose Ancestral Guidance, which to me again is more so a speedrunner type thing. But again, a shaman with a lot of healing power can make use of this. So for 10 seconds, 25% of the damage you deal is converted to healing, and then 100% of your healing is converted to damage. A very geared shaman can probably put up some decent numbers by use of Ancestral Guidance. Don't know how that's going to pan out really at the level 25 bracket, but it's there. The option is there. But I think you more than likely you're probably going to be swapping out between Earth Shield and Shamanistic Rage. Earth Shield is probably the staple one. That's the one people are most comfortable with. But obviously you see the usage for a 20% DR every minute plus a mana battery, right? That's pretty good. That being said, looking at the flexibility of the runes, the talents that they have early on, because their shaman talents aren't really bad. Like, you have reduced cast time on healing wave, you have reduced mana cost on all healing spells, you have ancestral healing, which is the same thing as inspiration. It's the armor buff when you critically hit. You have the what is it, radius or range, whatever, not range, but radius of your totems. Like, shamans have pretty decent early talents. So, and there's some flexibility you could use. Like, I know on my video or my stream, some people were mentioning if you allocate some talents into elemental warding, that gives you, resistance against some forms of magic damage. Like, that can be pretty decent, I guess. But I think with the overall flexibility of the shaman, even without chain heal, because chain heal is like kind of like the workhorse of shaman for quite some time, honestly. I think it falls in the pretty good category. I think it goes above the Disc Priest, though. I think it goes above the Disc Priest. It could be amazing, but I think one thing that's keeping it out of amazing is, well, two things. Shamans are pretty mana hungry, even with that mana reduction talent. Even with shamanistic rage, I don't know the mana cost on healing rain. That's one thing the tooltip doesn't say. It doesn't show me the mana cost on healing rain, which is your only AoE heal. So, and I think honestly that mana regen thing kind of was added just to give shamans a little bit more utility. I don't know if shamanistic rage fixes your mana problems, and to take it, that means you can't take Earth Shield, which is a pretty consistent heal. So I could see shamans being an amazing. I'm gonna put them at the top of the pretty good talent tier list, and we'll check it out more at the end. But I think shamans are in a pretty good spot. I don't think they're quite as good as priest at the level 25 bracket, just because priests just have a lot more runes that affect the raid and the party more so than the shaman does. Like barrier, mending, circle of healings, like those things shamans really just don't have access to. Right, shamans don't have Spirit Link Totem as a rune. They don't get mana tied until near max level. They don't really have anything that helps the party like a priest does. Whereas a priest can still AoE heal, maybe even a little bit better, because they still have. Let me double check before I say this. I'm about to say something that I don't mean, but they have Prayer of Mending. They have Circle of Healing. Now I don't think they get Prayer of Healing just yet. I don't see it on their list. I could be wrong. Somebody might correct me. I don't see it here. But they don't have Prayer of Healing. But Prayer of Healing is also a mana hungry ability. So I don't think not having Prayer of Healing hurts Priest. So I would put Shaman at the top of pretty good, behind Holy Priest though. And then let's go to Druid. Druid is in an interesting spot because it doesn't have, in my opinion, it doesn't have the flexibility rune wise that the other healers that we went over thus far have, but they have such strong options that maybe they don't need it. So let's look at the Druid real quick. And for the Druid, I think having the ability to get wild growth and life bloom is pretty substantial. Wild growth, just like Circle of Healing, is an instant that heals a couple of people. It is on the same cooldown. It is 6 seconds. So it just furthers the Druid's ability to blanket heal the raid. But Life Bloom is another one. So Life Bloom, let me bring up the tooltip for real here. So Life Bloom reduces, and I went over this in my Druid stream, it reduces the global cooldown on Rejuvenation and Life Bloom by half a second. That's pretty powerful. And I think they did this because haste doesn't exist in vanilla. Like the stat haste doesn't exist. So there's really no way to reduce the GCD like a Druid would in Wrath where they're stacking haste. Pardon me. Let me take a drink of water. So I think this was necessary. But it's also very powerful. Reducing the GCD for Rejuvenation, which is the most effective and, if not effective, but the most efficient heal that a Druid has, is crazy. I want to bring up the... Hold on one second. Where are we? Yeah, I want to bring up this. So, as we can see at level 25, the level 25 bracket, you have rank 4 of your rejuvenation, right? And if you look at this, so druids will have rejuvenation, they'll have wild growth, they'll have, oh, I forgot to put that in. Speaking of which, living seed. They'll have living seed. Their healing kit is really powerful. If you just want to go straight healing, like without the utility stuff, this setup alone makes you really good. Living seed, instead of like the wrath version, only works with regrowth and healing touch. This works with any healing spell you crit with, which is kind of crazy. I think a way to bring this in line would be to, I mean, I guess you don't even need to bring it in line, because in vanilla, to my knowledge, HOTS can't crit. I think HOTS or DOTS cannot crit. So unless they change that for Season of Discovery, this will be nutty. We'll put that little part in the need to see more, because I'm pretty sure HOTS do not crit in vanilla. And if they change that, then that's a big game changer across the board. I might as well just stop the stream right now, because if HOTS can crit and DOTS can crit, then that changes everything. I have to rethink my thought process here. But I'm just going to go with the notion that HOTS and DOTS still cannot crit. So in order to proc Living Seed, you still need to use Healing Touch. You still need to use Regrowth. And I think those are the only two direct spells that count for Living Seed. But anyway, if you use this setup, you have Living Seed to help out with single target healing. You have Wild Growth for multi-target healing. And you still have Life Bloom, which is a very powerful hot to help with not only single target, but triage healing as well. Like if someone gets a bad debuff, if a couple of people get a bad debuff, if someone's supposed to soak something, Life Bloom is there to help out, which makes the Druids very versatile. Like I said, they don't have the flexibility, because in what slot is this? The leg slot, you only really have Life Bloom to increase your healing throughput. Obviously, you could take Skull Bash to help out with interrupt utility. You could take Star Search to help push a boss, but these two things do nothing for your healing. So if you're just straight up trying to heal, you wouldn't take these. So that only leaves you one option, right? Hand slot. You only really have Wild Growth to increase your healing. You could take Sunfire for damage amp. You could take Mango for Kitty Weave if you / there's no one else in your party or raid that brings the bleed debuff, which is kind of crazy. But you're never going to use these two things, and you probably won't use Sunfire if you're a Resto Druid. So Wild Growth is the only option. Living Seed. Now, you could take Survival of the Fittest. It makes you crit immune and reduces all damage you take by 10%. Just as a survivability thing, you could take Survival of the Fittest. You could take Fear Your Storm Rage. It reduces the mana cost of Wrath by 100%, which honestly I kind of feel like that's going to get changed, but it hasn't been so far, and they've done a couple of rune changes now, and they haven't touched Fear Your Storm Rage. So maybe I'm like 60-40. 60 they're not going to change it. 40 they will change it. They've done a couple of passes now, and they haven't said anything or done anything. But anyway, it reduces the mana cost of Wrath by 100%, and each time you deal damage with Wrath, you have a 12% chance to get an instant healing touch. That could increase your healing throughput. Will it increase your healing throughput more than Living Seed? Maybe while gearing up, because I don't know how much crit you're going to have, or how many crit modifiers you're going to have to proc Living Seed, actually. You know what I'm saying? Like, you cannot get Nature's Bounty just yet, right? Which is like the real way to proc Living Seed, because getting a 25, I think it's 25%. Let me just power it up real quick just to see, just so I can have accurate numbers. My bad. 50% critical strike chance critical effect chance. Yes, critical effect chance I think is just critical strike. A 50% chance for a regrowth to crit. That means Living Seed is going to be primarily driven by regrowth. But let's take these out so I don't get confused. What's happening? This. There we go. Sorry. Fear of Storm Rage could drive your healing because it gives your longest cast time the chance to be instant, and Healing Touch is not a weak spell. So it just wasn't nearly as efficient as using Rejuvenation, or in this case Rejuve, or Life Bloom, because Life Bloom, after it blooms, or if it gets dispelled, it gives you half the cost back. So this setup makes Druids very versatile. Not very versatile, I'm sorry. This setup is not as versatile, but it makes Druids strong. The versatility kind of comes more so in their talent setup. So here I just have kind of like the generic talents that I had went over in the Resto Druid stream. where you take Improved Mark of the Wild, which I think is a no-brainer. Nature's Focus, which is spell pushback protection. I think it's just, even on a Druid where you're primarily casting Rejuvenation and probably Wild Growth and Life Bloom, I think this is important. Now, this talent kind of gets diminished if you're using the Fury of Storm Rage and you're using those instant cast procs for Healing Touch, right? But to be quite honest, this talent, the Improved Healing Touch, reducing the cast time on Healing Touch, also gets kind of diminished, because if you're relying on those instant procs to cast Healing Touch, you don't care if Healing Touch cooldown is or cast time is reduced. I just went with Spell Pushback just because Regrowth is still a cast and you don't want it to get interrupted, even though it's a fast cast. So I still went with Nature's Focus, but you could pick Improved Healing Touch for whatever reason. At the bottom here, you have Reflection, which is basically Resto Druid Meditation, allows mana to continually be generated while casting. Insect Swarm is a utility pick, and it's more so a pick to get down the tree, but it still reduces the enemy's chance to hit by 2%, which can be pretty critical, especially on the early up processes of a tank. Like if you're putting up Insect Swarm, reducing the tank's chance to be hit goes a long way, especially when they don't have gear. And then for Subtlety, I spoke about this talent in my stream as well. I think Resto Druid, I'm normally pretty dismissive on talents that reduce threat for healers, but I know Resto Druids and Resto Shamans are kind of the ones that really generate a lot of healer threat for ads that are not like ads that are just spawning. I think I used Anixia as the example, like Anixia's Whelps or the big Drake guards that she summons in. If a Resto Shaman is going ham with healing and the Resto Druid's going off with blanket healing, they could pull some pretty sizable threat if the tank isn't paying attention and, they get to it late. Or, in, more unlikely scenarios where the tank pulls one boss and maybe gets a whole bunch of misses or gets parried or, whatever have you, and the healer's still healing because the tank is taking damage, the healer might pull threat on a single target as well. I think, like I said, Resto Druid and Resto Shaman are kind of the ones that do that. I think it's a little bit less on the Alliance side because you do have Salve. But I think the point is just there just to get down to improve Rejuvenation, which increases the effect of Rejuve by 5%. I think that's a really good talent, even if it's just one talent point. 5% on your most efficient heal is pretty good. But you don't have to go this route. You can go into the Boomkin tree and you can do something like this. You can go down here. Actually, let's do this. Let's do Wrath, because I think if you're using Fury of Storm Rage, having faster Wrath casts may actually matter. We're going to go here. We're going to go Natural Weapons, and we're going to go Omen of Clarity. So Omen of Clarity is a 10-minute buff that you put on yourself, and it has a chance for your spell cast to give you the clear casting effect, which makes your next spell free. Clear casting could be a pretty big game changer, especially at the level 25 bracket where there's not a lot of high amounts of spirit, to my knowledge. Haven't seen the new gear yet. Only time will tell. But there's not a lot of high levels of spirit. There's not a lot of high levels of intellect. So your mana pool might not be as big as you think it is. So free casts are good in general, but free casts at the lower level bracket probably are going to be a thing that you're looking at. And the Boomkin tree still has some good stuff, right? It does have Omen of Clarity. It still has Improved Thorns. You can give it a little bit more utility, but you can go, you really do this for Omen of Clarity. You're not really doing it for anything else for real. But if you do something like this and then you still get Improved Mark of the Wild, yes, you are running the risk of missing the pushback protection for regrowth. You're definitely missing the more powerful Reflection, which means you really kind of got to rely on MP5 gear more so than Spirit gear, which could be a detriment to your mana regen, and you're missing out on Insect Swarm for the utility for the tank and 5% increase on Rejuvenation. So you kind of got to gauge which direction you want to go. Me personally, just as a purist healer, I'll just go down the Resto tree, but this might be a setup that you can do. I'm not saying it is, the option is there. But that in turn plays a part into how you tier the Druid. It plays a part into their flexibility. So I think the Druid, when in lieu of everything we just talked about, I think the Druid also goes into the amazing tier. I think the Druid is behind the Holy Priest, but I think it has enough tools in regards to its runes and its innate healing that it can kind of rival it. Now it doesn't. There's one thing it doesn't have that a priest does have. It doesn't have absorbs, right? Because it can, holy priest can still cast power with shield, right? It doesn't have a threat drop. I think fade does come into effect at level 25. I have to see really quick before I stamp that. Yeah, you get fade. You get fade. It says rank 2 fade at level 20. So at least I know it's there at level 25, right? So priests still have some utility things. Obviously, they can get improved fortitude, but it does come with some restrictions. If you're just going straight down the holy tree, you do bring the armor buff, the inspiration buff, which druids obviously don't have. So there are certain things. But, I mean, you can kind of consider inspiration and insect swarm kind of in the same line, because the tank having more armor versus the tank getting hit less is almost the same thing. Almost. But I would put Druid in the amazing tier. One, because Druid is, in my opinion, more mana efficient than Shaman and more versatile than if someone went full on disc. Because to go full on disc, again, you do bring stronger shields, you do bring a stronger fort, you do bring penance, which is a powerful single target healing spell. You do bring barrier, which is a very strong party cooldown. But that's really it. The problem, see, here's the thing, because I know I'm going to get a lot of comments for the barrier thing. Any priest can bring barrier. That's the problem. A shadow priest can bring barrier. A holy priest can bring barrier, right? So barrier is not indicative to just discipline alone. So yes, this priest can bring barrier, but any priest can bring barrier, right? Just like any druid can trank. You know what I mean? Like, obviously it's going to be stronger with healing power, but any druid can emergency trank and maybe save themselves and save maybe another person. So I think it's more, like I said, it's more mana efficient than shaman. It's a better throughput healer than disc, even with the disc lineup. So I think druid just has to go in the amazing tier. Now let's look at the black sheep of the healers, the mage healer, the arcane healer. And this one is kind of hard to gauge because obviously this is new. I wasn't at BlizzCon. I didn't get a chance to play the demo with Arcane Healer. But I looked into it. I watched a couple of POVs from that demo. And the way I think Mage Healer is going to work, I think I said this in the stream, I think it's kind of going to work like how Discipline works on retail right now. It's like an atonement healer. Let me bring up the thing here. Here we go. So with mage healing, and they did do some changes. I'm actually going to put up those changes right now so we can kind of look at them together real quick. They did put up some changes. I can move the shaman thing over here now, and I can put you on the same one. All right. So mage healer. So rewind time, which was a rune that the mage had. So what they did was they changed the cooldown from 1 minute to 30 seconds. And what rewind time did was your current target with your temporal beacon instantly heals all damage taken over the last 5 seconds. It's ineffective on targets that did not have temporal beacon 5 seconds ago. So basically what this means is that if your tank is taking a high amount, not just your tank, but I just use tanks because they're the ones who generally are taking the more consistent amounts of damage. But if your tank is taking damage, rewind is it's like an external. It's really, I think, the only external that is available for healers. And what I mean by external, things like pain suppression, things like guardian spirit, these things obviously don't exist in vanilla right now, but they will come. I think both of those abilities happen in TBC. But no other healer has like a tank external like that, where it's on a micro cooldown. It's 30 seconds now, so it's not a minute. And it just kind of gives a burst amount. It's not a DR in this case, but it gives a burst amount of healing. So like, where's my mage thing? I want to bring that back up. Here we go. So if I'm not mistaken, mage is the only healer that brings an external. I guess you can consider bopping external, but bopping a tank without communication is very dangerous. If they don't have a cancel aura macro and retaunt immediately, somebody's dead. Yeah, I guess you can consider. I don't even think sacrifice does what it does. No, sacrifice only stops a certain amount of damage, not a percentage. So sacrifice isn't even a good external. And I don't even think that's in the game just yet. I could double check real quick, but I don't think that's in the game. Let me see. Or if it is in the game, it's not at the level 25 bracket. It doesn't look like it is. So really, the only other quote unquote real external is blessing of protection, and we know how risky that is when it comes to using it on the tank. Let me check the. Oh, I didn't even check the comments real quick. Oh yeah, the improved shield talent is so early in disc. However, I wouldn't be surprised to see it on. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think both improved powered shield and improved fort are going to see some play, even if you're trying to primarily be a holy priest. Dependent on the fights that we see will dictate that, because you're still missing out. I think to get those talents, you have to invest 10 talent points into the discipline tree. You only have 16 talents to play with, so that means 6 are going into the holy tree. So at that point, you have to kind of gauge, is it worth having improved powered shield and improved fort over the inspiration buff? It might be. It might be. Maybe if you're horde, it might be. I don't know if that works. That pans out if you're an alliance player, because priests are the only way to get that if you're alliance. So it might pan out more if you're a horde player. But I think you're gonna see some play there. But don't get me distracted, Cap. Anyway, so I had to answer that though. But for mages, for the mage healer, let me just throw in some runes real quick so we can talk about it. Let's do that one. Okay, so what was I talking about? Rewind time. So rewind time, yeah, I think rewind time is the only true safe tank external. Now there's a couple of tricky things you can do. You can use powered barrier as an external, because it does target the person and drops it on the party. So like if a tank is taking a lot of damage, you throw barrier on them, right? That can be used as an external. You can use DSAC as an external. If you have a paladin in the same group as whoever's tanking, they can use divine sac to help mitigate some of the damage there. That can be technically an external. There's two issues. Well, not issues, but there's two things with those two examples I just gave that rewind time doesn't have. So barrier is a 3-minute cooldown, so you can't keep doing that. Now, 1 or 2 uses of barrier might be enough to get you through it, right? But it is a 3-minute cooldown, so if you can't get the job done, you're not going to see barrier for a little bit. And honestly, 3 minutes is kind of a godsend for vanilla type cooldowns. Vanilla cooldowns, especially ones as strong as barrier, normally are like 5-10 minute cooldowns. Like if you look at it compared to like evasion is a 5-minute cooldown. Last stand is a 10-minute cooldown. Shield wall is like a 30-minute cooldown, right? So powered barrier reducing 20% of the damage every 3 minutes is really like priests are getting off really lucky with that. I honestly think that might be tuned maybe a little later. That might get it increased to 5 or 10 minutes. But if it stays at 3, that's really strong. But rewind time doesn't have that problem because it's a 30-second cooldown. And if you read the tooltip, it says it instantly heals all the damage you just took within 5 seconds. So it's an instant heal, an instant big heal every 30 seconds. It's like it's like a nature swiftness on steroids. You know how like nature swiftness makes your next instant cast, makes your next cast to spell instant. Normally you would like nature swiftness healing touch or nature swiftness healing wave. Like this is like nature swiftness and the heal all in one in less than half of the cooldown because it's only 30 seconds. I think nature swiftness is like a 3-minute cooldown. Right? Like, look at that comparison. Nature Swiftness, which just makes your next cast instant, and Powered Barrier, which makes you take 20% reduced damage for like 10 seconds, are on the same CD. Nutty. But I'm going to get off Priest now. I'm just ranting. But Rewind Time is a really good external, and it can be used consistently every single time, not just for the tank, for anybody, really. If someone is soaking something, someone got hit by something, like Rewind Time is there to help. And I think this is going to really, really be something that you use. I didn't talk too much about this rune in my mage stream because this was before they changed it. Rewind time was a minute cooldown in my mage stream. So maybe what I'll do is I'll go back on like all of the stuff that I did and put comments on what changes were made. so people don't think that I'm just missing things. But anyway, rewind time is definitely something that we'll see some play now. But back to the healing profile of the mage. Yeah, it kind of operates like a disc priest would on retail, where regeneration applies temporal beacon. Regeneration is a channel, though. Keep that in mind. Regeneration is a channel. It'll apply temporal beacon. They'll have that beacon for, I think, 30 seconds, right? Let me double check. Yep, 30 seconds. It prevents you from using ice block for 5 minutes, and it reduces your frost and fire damage by 50%. So obviously, once you commit to using regeneration, that's it, right? You can't be a DPS and just flip flop back and forth from being a full-time healer to a full-time DPS. I think that change was very necessary. I don't know why they made ice block, like maybe, I don't know. I don't know why they made ice block a part of that. Like, healers having immunities isn't unheard of looking at Paladins. So I don't know why that's a thing, but who knows? I don't know. And then you have mass regeneration, which does the same thing as regeneration, just obviously on more targets. It heals the target player's party members, so 5 people. So you can put temporal beacon on 5 people at half the duration if you use mass regeneration, because it's 15 seconds instead of 30 seconds. But it still puts the ability on there, and what temporal beacon does is 40% of the arcane damage you deal gets converted into healing. And that's kind of how Disc Priest works on retail. When you put Atonement on somebody, either via Powered Shield or Renew, once you deal damage, a portion of the damage you deal gets converted to healing, so on and so forth. And this presents an interesting way to play a healer for vanilla. I had read on one of the posts on Wowhead, it was a forum post, that someone said, no one's going to play mage healer. This is sad who asked for this. And I agree with kind of half of that. I don't think anyone necessarily asked for mage healers, but I don't think no one's going to play them. That comment is going to age horribly. I think people are definitely going to play mage healers, because not only is it a real way to deal damage as a healer, it plays differently from all of the other healers. So one thing I kind of would have liked to see is them go a different route with mage healing and kind of give the atonement style healing to actual disc, if that makes sense, because that started with disc. So I would have liked to see that. But in regards to where they tier at, so mage is kind of tough. I think for any speedrunning community, you're going to have at least one mage healer, because mages are still going to do damage, right? Even at 40% effectiveness, if you're stacking, I guess in a mage's case, you would probably need to stack spirit. I say spirit because mages do have an arcane meditation talent. Actually, I'll put it back over here so you can see. Mages do have an arcane meditation talent that at the level 25 bracket, you can only put 1 point in it. So you can only get 5%. But once more talent points and the higher level band becomes active, that'll be able to go to 15%. So it's kind of like the same thing as a druid. But I think spirit is going to be a major player here, because meditation means you can stack spirit, which means you can get more mana back, meaning a mage is still going to be driven by spirit and damage gear, which does exist. We know that for a fact. Mages, to my knowledge, if they keep it in the game, because they did say they were maybe thinking about putting in legendary runes and maybe keeping the old legendary. So if you have, just as an example, if you have a mage with Atiesh, that mage is still going to do a lot of damage, even at 40% effectiveness, which will just convert into a lot of healing. So when you can have the best of both worlds, you're kind of looking at that spec of that class in a league of its own. And because mage is really the only class that can do damage and healing in the same GCD, you kind of got to look at mage differently here. Now, of course, I'm speculating here, so only time will tell how effective mages will be. I think this is determined on... The major thing is determined on, and I think I said this in my mage stream, is how does healing and damage spell power scale with mages? Because as we know, here, let me duplicate this real quick so I can show you. So let's go to mage best in slot, right? So they have ITS here. So let's look at the chest real quick. Maybe not the chest. Let's look at this item, the Eye Stalk Waste Cord. So it increases critical strike chance with spells by 1%. Increases damage and healing done by magical spells by 41. So does Temporal Beacon double dip? Does it increase since you're doing damage with either Arcane Missiles or Arcane Blast? Does that part get increased? And then does the healing portion from Temporal Beacon get increased? Like these are things that I would want to know, because if it is double dipping, that kind of immediately puts Mage in the best all around category. Immediately, when you're double dipping with spell power and you're able to attack and heal within the same GCD, you kind of gotta go in the best. Until we figure that out, I mean, maybe someone out there who has played on the BlizzCon demo, who is paying enough attention to that type of thing, can tell me further. But I don't think it's gonna work that way. I think if you're a mage and you have this gear set up, looking at the way the stats work, I think if you put Temporal Beacon on someone and then you cast Arcane Missiles at an enemy, the Arcane Missiles, the damage is going to be increased by up to 41. And then separately, when that damage gets converted into healing, that healing is going to get converted up to 41. I don't think it's going to be like an 82 thing. Like, you're not going to get increased by 80. That would just be ridiculous. That would be utterly ridiculous. And like I said, I think that would almost immediately put, if not Mage as the best healer, damn near the top. Because you're double dipping, you're effectively getting double the stat that no other healer can do. So I'd have to see more for that interaction before I really, really call out Mage. I'm still gonna tier them, but that's something that I really want to know. But going back to this, I think because mages have regeneration and they have mass regeneration, I think this automatically makes mages pretty decent spot healers. I don't think they're in the same category as the other great spot healers like Paladins, but they can definitely cover a larger field faster than Paladins. Again, on a Paladin, you can just tab Flash of Light, tab Flash of Light, tab Flash of Light. On a Mage, let me just check the cooldown on mass regen. Yep, it's 6 seconds. You can mass regen, Arcane Missiles, Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast, Arcane Blast. 6 seconds up, mass regen another group, Arcane. Like, you can work it even if you're just using, what is it? Where is the regular regeneration? Did I miss it? Oh, it's right in my face. All right. Even if you're just using regeneration, which has no cooldown, you can regen somebody. You can regen somebody. Arcane Blast, regen, Arcane Blast, regen. Like, you can even if you tab it, you can still do it. Now, here's the problem that you have with mages. Number one, for rewind time to be a thing, you have to miss out on taking Arcane Blast, which probably is the more potent of the quote unquote heal spells, because this Arcane Blast, we can look at the tooltip and see if this one's better. That's the same thing. So you blast the target, dealing arcane damage. Each time you cast Arcane Blast, the damage and healing of all other arcane spells is increased by 15%, and the mana cost of Arcane Blast is increased by 175%, stacked 4 times, and lasts 6 seconds until you cast another arcane spell. So in a nutshell, what this means is you cast 4 Arcane Blasts, your next arcane ability, which in this case probably would be either Arcane Missiles or Arcane Explosion. Keep that in mind, Arcane Explosion. I'm pretty sure mages have Arcane Explosion at this point, before I say that. There it is, rank 2, yep. So Arcane Missiles or Arcane Explosion, in case someone's taking AoE healing, or in case someone's taking AoE damage, you're healing them for a lot. What is 15 times 4? What is that, 60%? No, that's not 60%. That's 30, 45. That's 60%. Yeah, 15 times 4 is 60%. So a 60% healing amp on either spell, Arcane Missiles or Arcane Explosion, is going to net you a pretty strong effect. So you just kind of got to pick your poison on what you need. Do you need Arcane Blast more than you need Rewind Time? I'd probably say default, you probably pick Arcane Blast, because while Rewind Time is strong, you get more usage out of this. Even if you're not stacking it up to 4 times, if you're stacking it up to 2 times, a 30% increase is pretty decent, right? So If you use 2 arcane blasts and then arcane missiles or arcane explosion, that's still pretty decent. That's gonna heal somebody pretty fast too. Like it's like a 30%, anything probably 45 and up is going to do effectively the same healing as a rewind time before you take into account overhealing. So I would say and rewind time only works on one person, whereas you can use arcane explosion to heal multiple people. So I think by default you take arcane blast. On certain fights, I'm sure rewind time is going to be a thing, but I think by default you probably use this as like the baseline arcane mage setup here. Now, if you don't need mass regeneration, let's say you're in the BFD 10-man group and you only really need spot healing, because with mass regen, you can really temporal beacon half your raid group in a 10-man. But you might not need that as consistent. Like, you might not need that on every single fight. Maybe one or 2 fights where you need like AoE healing, but you probably won't use this every single fight. So you probably look for something like, pardon me, Icy Veins, which is a pretty good rune, increasing your spellcasting speed and reducing pushback by 100% last 20 seconds. Icy Veins is a pretty good rune, and it's only a 3-minute cooldown. Like, these 3-minute cooldowns is really what's the driving force for the runes. So Icy Veins is a pretty good one. Arcane Surge is a pretty good one. Like, it's a big nuke, and this is kind of like if you're trying to be cheeky, like you put regeneration on somebody and you like follow it up with a really, really big healing nuke, and then you get the mana regen afterwards. The only problem with Arcane Surge is that it uses like your entire mana pool, so this is kind of risky. I don't know if I would use Arcane Surge. I'd probably stick to either using Mass Regen or Icy Veins, to be quite honest with you. But it's there if you need it. So, having said all that and looked at it, I think I'm skeptical to put Mage in the amazing tier because it still doesn't have, like, putting Temporal Beacon on one person and then using Arcane Blast or Arcane Missiles on that on the boss to like heal still probably won't be as strong as like a priest who stacked up Serendipity and put out a really fast greater heal. Like that heal isn't going to be as strong, right? It's going to be strong, but it's not going to be as strong as like a real heal, like, for lack of a better term. So I'm skeptical to put them in the amazing tier, even though things are kind of shaping up to where they could be amazing. I think for the mage, and some people are going to get mad at me, but I think for the mage, I think I need to see more. And what I really need to see is how Temporal Beacon healing scales with damage and healing power gear. Is it just damage? Is it just healing? Is it both in some weird way? Is it going to double dip? That's a really, really big thing that you kind of got to figure out. So, because let me see. So they do have the equation in there, but I'm gonna be honest, I haven't done the equation to figure out where it's coming from. So maybe after the stream I'll do it, but because I'm definitely not a math whiz. But anyway, that's a big question I would have to have. But I guess for the sake of conversation, let's just go with the idea that it's not double dipping, right? When you cast the damage ability, it'll scale off of whatever damage number it is, and when that damage gets converted to healing, that healing goes off of whatever the healing power is, right? Let's go with that. Judging by that factor, I would say the mage is probably in a pretty good tier. Is it stronger than Disc Priest? For single target healing, maybe they're on the same tier, because if a Disc Priest is using pardon me, Strength of Soul, if they're using Penance, if they're using Prayer of Mending, the Disc Priest probably takes the edge, right? The Disc Priest probably takes the edge, albeit they're kind of locked into the runes that they have. So the Disc Priest kind of takes the edge there in that regard, but the mage is definitely a lot more flexible when it comes to AoE healing, even without mass regeneration, because regeneration doesn't have a cooldown. So you could set up some temporal beacons because it lasts 30 seconds, right? It's not like a little 12 or 8 second buff. You can temporal beacon 3 people and then hit into your damage rotation, even without mass regen, right? So I'll put the mage in a pretty good tier. truthfully speaking, it should be in the need to see more, because I just think we do need to see more from the mage. Like, there's just things we need to know. But if I had to tier it, I'd probably put it in the pretty good tier. But I'm going to leave it right there for now, and then I'll go through the whole thing at the end here. And then lastly, we have the pink boys, the Paladins. And Paladin, at least on the Alliance side, obviously if you played Alliance, you've seen a Holy Paladin. It was pretty good. It brought really strong buffs. It was a really strong single target healer, really strong tank healer. So Paladins definitely made a name for themselves. Paladins could also make the use of any type of gear, much to the chagrin of a lot of the other healers. Like, seeing a Paladin who wore plate but also wore cloth gear probably vexed a lot of priests and a lot of druids and stuff like that. So it is what it is. But for the Paladin, let's break it down and see where we can tier it at. So the Paladin kind of falls into the same thing that the Druid had, where there's not really a lot of rune options for the Paladin because it's sharing rune slots with two other specs. And as we can see here, each rune slot only has a certain set of runes. So you can't give, like, as an example for, what is this, the hand slot. There's only three options here for the level 25 bracket. So you can't make like 2 out of the 3 options for Holy, because then it kind of diminishes the others. So Paladins were kind of rigid in their rune options. Now, what the Paladin does have is kind of in the same vein as the Priest, where it has, in that leg slot, it has a lot of flexibility, because it has Divine Sack, which we spoke about, which can be used as a tank external if necessary, or just a party external for AoE damage. We have an Inspiration Exemplar, which is basically Fear Aura or Tremor Aura, or whatever you want to call it. It periodically removes fear and sleep effects, which also kind of diminishes the power of Fear Ward. Kind of. Obviously, Fear Ward is a guarantee, and you can store it on somebody. But if you have a Paladin in the group, it, like I said, very slightly diminishes the usefulness of Fear Ward. But then you also have Rebuke, which is an interrupt, depending on how much you need interrupts. For speedrunning boys, you have Exorcist, which makes Exorcism castable on any target and makes it a guaranteed crit on undead and demons. So in the leg slot, Paladins have a pretty flexible, toolkit here. A lot of options here. For baseline play, you probably pick the Fear Aura. For speedrun boys, you probably pick Divine Sack or Exorcist. And Rebuke is probably a niche one. Rebuke is a niche one because I don't know every single vanilla fight off the top of my head, but I don't know how many require. In a 40-man, like, are you really going to need the Holy Paladin to also take an interrupt if you have, 6 warriors and 4 rogues? And, are you really going to need the Holy Paladin to also take an interrupt? So that's why I say Rebuke is the niche pick here. They have it just in case, but I think this is more so for, Rets. If you want to start bringing Rets, they have the option to be useful. But for the baseline pick, you have Inspiration. But speaking of Ret and, the other specs and stuff like that, that's where this kind of flexibility turns into a double-edged sword for Paladins. You can't really say that for the Druid, because at least for the Druid, the healing runes were really resto-centric. I'll bring it up real quick because I still have it here. A Feral DPS Druid, a Balanced Druid, or a Bear is not really going to take Wild Growth. You know what I mean? A Balanced Druid could take Wild Growth, but they're not going to take Wild Growth over Sunfire. You know what I mean? There's no overlap there. A Bear Druid probably isn't going to take Wild Growth either. They're going to pick Lacerate or Mangle or Sunfire, because I guess you can use it in bear form now. But there's not much spec overlap here. There's a little spec overlap with Life Bloom. A tank Druid could take Life Bloom as they wait for the tank swap. They can Life Bloom themselves, go back into bear form, taunt. So that can be a thing. A Boomkin could take Life Bloom, but then they're missing out on Star Search, probably one of their hardest, if not the hardest hitting ability that they're going to have in vanilla. So that's probably not a thing. A Feral DPS Druid is not going to take Star Search, Life Bloom over Savage Roar. They might take Skull Bash, but they're going to cry if they don't. They're going to cry. If you make your Feral Druid take Skull Bash over Savage Roar, you're going to get your mug out, because you're going to save some tears. But yeah, there's not much resto overlap here. But if you look at the Paladin one, our Red Paladin could take Inspiration Exemplar and just only miss out on Rebuke. And again, if you have other classes who can do the interrupt, but not necessarily do what this rune does, it makes sense for leaving the interrupts to the tanks, the rogues, the warriors, and letting the Ret Paladin be the tremor totem bot, right? That makes sense. So that kind of diminishes the value of the Holy Paladin taking it, because you're not gonna you're not gonna need more than one Paladin to do this. Maybe, because it only affects party members depending on how important that fear is. I think I used Onyxia again as the example, like when she lands and she does the bellowing roar, and you want to make sure that everyone is broken out immediately. Sure, that's a fight where multiple paladins using multiple inspiration exemplars are a thing, but for the most part, I don't think you're gonna need 5 paladins, or how many parties is in a 40-man? 8 paladins all to take this. So that's kind of one, right? Same thing with Divine Sacrifice. And Divine Sacrifice is a little tricky because this version, you can't immune the damage off. As you can see here, Divine Sacrifice cannot be used while under the effects of Blessing of Protection, Divine Shield, or Divine Protection. It means you got to take the damage. It's a little bit more risky as a healer when you're responsible for other people's lives. If you're worried about healing yourself, it gets kind of tricky. So, but you could also have other paladins take this and be okay. So, like I said, it doesn't change really the way I would tier, but it kind of does very slightly because it is a double-edged sword. The more paladins you have, the less useful the flexibility in their runes become, if that makes sense. But they do have some pretty flexible runes in that leg slot. When it comes to talents, I think paladins they have a little bit of flexibility. They're rigid, but not as rigid as some of the other things that we've seen. So this right here is kind of a generic setup. I have Divine Intellect, the Spell Pushback Protection. This talent is really important for a spec that doesn't have Holy Shock and that primarily hard cast. So this is a really important talent. You have Holy Healing Light, which increases the amount healed by your Holy and Flash of Light. You have Improved Lay on Hands, which I think, I said this before, this is a slept on talent because when maxed out, it makes your Lay on Hands give 30% increased bonus armor for 2 minutes. That's a really strong buff for 2 minutes of a fight. Really strong. However, if you don't want this talent, you can, hold on, what am I missing? You can drop some points here. You can do that. And you can put it in Unyielding Faith, which gives you that fear, disorient, resist chance. The reason why I didn't really tier this one is because if you are running Inspiration Exemplar, this kind of cancels out this talent, right? Because yes, full resist on fears are great. Obviously, it's more favorable than waiting for your fear aura to tick. But assuming that this is going to have the same tick rate as a tremor totem, even if you catch a fear at the end of the tick, the most you're going to be feared is what, 4 seconds? Not even 4, maybe 3 seconds, right? So you're not going to take that full 8 second duration fear. So to me, you really don't want this talent. It's kind of a trap. I think those talent points are better suited in Improved Lay on Hands. And you have a floating talent here. So this is at 24. You could put that talent in Consecration. This is, not a bad option. I happen to think that Consecration is just a means to get down the tree, especially at this level cap. I don't think Holy Paladins are running into mobs to consecrate, at least not in traditional rating, maybe in speedrun rating. But I think this is not, this is not something that you got to prioritize at level 25. I think the better option is Improved Blessing of Wisdom. Having a 10% increased effect on Blessing of Wisdom is pretty strong in my opinion, especially since we don't know the abundancy or the scarcity of MP5 or Spirit gear. I guess in this case, MP5 gear. Paladins really can't use Spirit. Or you can put that one talent point into Illumination, which gives your Flash of Light, Holy Light, or Holy Shock, which you don't have at this point, a 20% chance to gain the mana back if it crits. This talent I don't think is as strong with one talent point. I think you're better suited to go into Improved Blessing of Wisdom. You already get half of the value, and again, I don't know how much crit you're gonna have at level 25. There could be a whole bunch of crit items on the new gear that we're going to see. Until that's, proven, I think the better option is here. Now, if you want to be the buff boy, you want to be a buff paladin, there are ways to do this. You could go into the prot tree, pardon me, and get improved devotion aura for more armor for your party or raid. And then you can get in Kings, which is, we all know Kings is a strong buff. And then, so that puts you at level 20, and I think you just put the last 5 points into improved intellect. The reason why I don't like this setup is, one, you have to invest a lot of talent points just to get to the real prize here, which is Kings. Like, improved devotion aura is cool, but I don't think it's make or break. If you don't have this talent, I don't think anyone notices. Kings is strong, but I don't know if it's 11 talent points strong, especially when you only have 16 to work with. So while Kings is a strong talent, is it worth 11 talent points at level 25? Probably not. Secondly, now that hunters can bring Kings, you're probably going to have a couple of hunters. Have one of them put the King's rune in and call it a day. That's really how that goes, in my opinion. If I'm a raid leader and I'm building up the raid comp and stuff like that, instead of having my paladin invest, almost 80%, like 80% of his talents just to get King's, yo, hunter, change out your rune. Be a team player and call it a day. But if you don't have access to any hunters and you don't have access to any other paladins, and you're the only paladin the only paladin that plays holy in your raid group, then I guess you could take Kings. Maybe. You could also go the retribution route where you take improved blessing of might. This comes at almost the same reasoning that I give Kings. Well, improved blessing of might is a strong talent in and of itself, and it only takes 5 talent points to get the max. You're still taking 5 talent points out of your holy tree. So looking at this setup, you go improved blessing of might, you can go spiritual focus, and you only have 1 talent point now to work with. And where you put that in, you probably put that in healing light just to give your heals more power. But this doesn't sit well with me either, because you're risking a lot of healing throughput for improved blessing of might. This might be a speedrunner thing. Again, if that scenario where you're the only holy paladin and the only one who can spec into this might be a thing. But I think at the early level bracket, more than likely, you're probably going to do something like this and call it a day. Now, I think the paladin has very clear-cut strengths and weaknesses when it's time to tier something. Paladins cannot AoE heal. I made a joke on my paladin stream. Actually, I'll bring this back over just to show you. I made a joke on my paladin stream that the only way in vanilla a paladin can AoE heal, ironically, is by virtue of taking Divine Storm, because Divine Storm heals 3 party or raid members, for 25% of the damage that it deals. And I said in that paladin stream, I don't think there's a caster weapon that has, like a one-hander, that has high enough weapon damage to even remotely think about using Divine Storm seriously. But like I said, ironically, this is the only way a paladin can heal multiple people in one GCD. Unless I'm missing something completely about the vanilla paladin, which I don't think I am. I mean, I can really take a look real quick. Yeah, they don't have any spells that AoE heal. So that's one of the bigger weaknesses of the Holy Paladin, is that they're great spot healers, they're great single target healers, but if the raid group is taking large amounts or consistent amounts of AoE damage, the Paladin really is only good enough to spam flashlight and tap. But the silver lining there is Paladins just happen to be really, really strong single target healers. Probably the best single target healer. And their buffs, some of their buffs you can, I mean, I guess now this doesn't equate now, but in the past, a lot of their buffs only came from Paladins. Now, obviously, hunters can bring Kings. You can bring more than one Paladin, which is commonplace. And Paladins are still the only source to get salvation. So they still have that uniqueness to them. And judging by this, if you play Alliance, Paladins are the only way to get Tremor Totem, so you can look at it like that. But Paladins still are kind of, even though they're one-trick ponies, they're really good at that one trick. So how do you tier something like that when you look at the combined power that the other healers are getting? I think because the Paladin kind of lost some of its luster with the other runes that the other classes are getting, I think I'd probably put Paladin in serviceable. Now, they do get Beacon, they do get Divine Sack, but Divine Sack is the same thing that kind of what happens with Powered Barrier. Any Paladin can bring Divine Sack. Ret, Prot, doesn't matter, right? So Divine Sack isn't exclusive to Holy Paladin. Beacon, obviously no other Paladin is really going to make use of Beacon of Light other than the Holy Paladin. And Beacon of Light is really strong, but it still only lends to their single target power. It doesn't really lend power to their... It doesn't fix like AoE healing. Or... Yeah, or like even triage healing. Like, it makes them better triage healers. I'll give it that. You know what? Maybe I'm being too hard on them. Nah, I think I'm gonna leave it there. I think Paladins are serviceable. I think they could be stronger. I think in small group setups, 5-mans, you put Beacon on somebody, you are healing. Like you can always heal 2 people in a 5-man setup, so that's really strong. But in a raid setup, I think just by virtue of its healing power, I think Paladins kind of at a disadvantage when it comes to healing. Because if you compare it, like how does a Paladin compare with a priest who's using Serendipity, who can cast greater heals at the same casting speed as their flash of light? How does it compare with another priest, any priest really, who brings barrier? Divine Sack and barrier, like barrier is way stronger than Divine Sack without having to redirect damage. There's no threat or danger of dying, right? How does a Paladin compare with Healing Rain, where you have consistent rot damage on the raid group and Paladin is just tab flashing away? How does it compare with Wild Growth? How does it compare with Life Bloom? Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, even when it's the strongest single target healer, other healers have things that kind of compete with it. You know what I'm saying? So I would put Paladin in serviceable at the level 25 bracket. Once you get more talents and more runes, Paladins definitely move up because the single target damage becomes higher. Their trick becomes more what's the word? What's the phrasing I'm looking for? Their single target power becomes more desirable the higher you go in the level cap. At level 25, I don't think it's going to be that high to where you say you need a Paladin to heal the tank. I'll give them this. Paladin might be the most efficient single target healer. I'll give them that. And that should be because that's their trick. That's their one trick. So I'll give them that. But I think Paladin goes into the serviceable tier. It could go at the bottom of pretty good, but it wouldn't be because of their healing. It'd be because of the buffs. And like I said, right now you have hunters who can bring kings. You have any form of Paladin who can bring Divine Sack or the Fear Aura. You have any form of Paladin who can do all the other buffs. Salvation, might, things of that nature. And Paladins can bring improved wisdom. I'll give them that. They can bring half, like a 10% stronger improved wisdom. But is that really what's going to push them from serviceable to pretty good? In my opinion, no. So I think for the level 25 bracket, I'd probably leave Paladin at serviceable. And until we see more, I don't think I need to see much more, right? I don't need to put them in the mage tier where I need to see how Temporal Beacon interacts with damage, like with spell power. I need to see that. Until I see that, I'm not comfortable. I did do a speculative thing for those who missed it real quick. I said, if Temporal Beacon heals the way I think it does, I'd put them in pretty good. But until I see it, it's going to need to see more. But I think Paladin is inserviceable. If this was just based off 5-man content, I think Paladin bumps up. But I think right now, this is kind of what it is. And that's really it for the healers. Now, let's overlook this and see if we make any swaps. So in the amazing tier, we have the Holy Priest and the Druid. And when you compare these two things, let's see if I can bring it up real quick. Do I still have the priest up? Let's see. I do have priest. And let's shrink this down a little bit. I have priest. Where's the Druid one? Druid, where are you? I think I might need to make a new Druid one, which is fine. I'll make a new Druid one. Oh, that's one thing I did forget. You know what? And I guess this doesn't really help the Paladin. It kind of hurts them. We'll talk about it real quick since I just did the Paladin. On the changes. So Paladins, their beacon of light went from 60 yards to 40 yards. I don't think that's too drastic of a change in 10-man content. Generally speaking, your targets aren't 60 yards away in a 10-man, right? Things are kind of close-knit, but that is a nerf. That is a yard, like that is a nerf, right? They did, I guess, reduce the cooldown of Crusader Strike from 6 seconds to 4. This, I think, would have been more impactful for Holy if they increased the mana you return. If they increased it from 2% to 4%, then I would probably say a Holy Paladin could really make use of it, but yeah, it doesn't. And then, of course, they added the fact that you can't immune the damage from Divine Sack, which I think hurts really bad. So they did do that. They changed Seal of Martyrdom. That's not a holy thing, so you ain't got to worry about that. But yeah, I think that yard reduction, I don't think it matters for Black Fathom Depths, but maybe in later raids when you have more people to heal, it does matter, right? So, again, Paladins, serviceable, could be a little bit stronger in my opinion. But back to the Priest. I'm going to move this over here. I think I need to make a new Druid one because I don't have it up anymore. So let's just make a new Druid one real quick. I'm just double checking to make sure I don't have it floating around. I did have it floating around. See, look at that. Oh, it's too big. Let's do this. Shrink down. Scroll up. Right. All right. Move this over a little bit. All right. You guys can see. You guys can see the Holy talent build. You can see the runes. You can see the Resto talent build. You can see the runes, right? Okay. So, and you know what? We'll change this back to Living Seed just so we can talk about it. Just so we have both straight up healers who I put in A tier to figure it out. Okay. So, judging by these two setups here, Priest still is the more versatile healer. Because I think Circle of Healing and Wild Growth cancel each other out. I think Prayer of Mending is a little bit stronger than Life Bloom. It's something that doesn't have to be managed. It jumps on its own. It goes between party and raid members, and it's a pretty decent heal. It's instant. You can use it on the move. Life Bloom is also instant. It stacks 3 times. To my knowledge, this version of Life Bloom does not have that one target requirement. It can and it gives you half of the cost back when it does bloom. So Prayer Mending and Life Bloom are kind of the same thing. I think Prayer Mending is a little bit better just because you don't actively need to manage it. Once it's out there, it bounces, right? Now, it could also bounce to somebody who's not going to take damage. That effectively makes it a dead spell. Whereas Life Bloom, because you are actively casting it, you're going to put it on somebody who is taking damage or who is likely to take damage like a tank. So I think with those two pros and cons, these two things kind of cancel each other out. I give this slight nod to Prayer Mending, but Life Bloom is still strong as well. And it reduces the GCD of Rejuve, which really, really makes it strong. Even though reducing the GCD on Rejuve could just lead to a lot of overhealing. So you kind of got to look at it like that too. But for the most part, these two things are pretty... These 2 rune slots, the hand slot and the leg slot, are pretty much the same. Living Seed is not a better rune than Serendipity, by and large. It is not. Number one, it only works with, to my knowledge, again, I went over this, and for those just joining, I went over this when I went over the Druid breakdown, but to my knowledge, HOTS cannot crit. So Living Seed can never proc off Rejuvenation. It can never proc off Life Bloom. It can never proc off the hot effect of Regrowth. So that means you only have Healing Touch, Regrowth, and when it comes to when it becomes a talent point, Swift Mend. But we don't have Swift Mend yet. We only have Healing Touch and Regrowth. So with those 2 spells, because I don't know how much crit we're going to actually be able to use or have at level 25, because we can't get Nature's Bounty until way later in the level bracket, Living Seed, even though it's a good rune for tank healing and single target healing, it's like a It's like a poor man's prayer mending if you want to think about it. This is not stronger than Serendipity. Serendipity makes your flash heal, which is already your fastest heal, make your next heal, because I don't think you're ever going to use a Serendipity charge on lesser heal. Let's be real. I don't even know why they added lesser heal to that equation there. But it might, who knows? With the amount of mana that you have at level 25, lesser heal might be the more lucrative option. But anyway, when you flash heal, the cast time of your greater heal, which is probably greater heal or prayer of healing. Those are the two spells that you're going to use it on. And I think you can just exclude prayer of healing because I'm pretty sure priests don't have prayer of healing at that level. Let me see. I don't see prayer of healing. Yeah, so really greater heal. Basically greater heal. Your greater heal being it's 20%. So 60% faster, which is basically the same cast time as flash heal, is mind-boggling. Now, you might say, hey, Soul, because priests don't have prayer of healing, it kind of diminishes the value of Serendipity. You would be correct, right? That is true. That's one major spell that Serendipity affects that you don't have yet. And I'm every time I say that, I'm glancing over this just to make sure. You know what? I should really just so I'm not giving out false information here. I'm just gonna put some talent points in and see, when do priests get prayer of healing? Prayer mending. Prayer of healing. Rank 1 comes at level 30. There it is. All right, so yeah, priests don't have prayer of healing at the level 25 bracket. So we can get rid of this and this. That's not going to, whatever. Anyway. So yeah, Serendipity's value does get diminished slightly because you can't use it on prayer of healing. But greater heal is such a strong heal that it doesn't even matter. For your AoE healing, you have circle of healing. You have circle of healing, which is fine in and of itself, and you have prayer of mending to back you up. So you really don't need prayer of healing for this, right? Prayer of healing, using Serendipity on prayer of healing really is for when you're taking like constant large amounts of AoE healing, not just like Saffron ticks. I'm trying to think what boss can I reference that does a lot of AoE healing that requires. I'm trying to think. I can't really think of any. I'm sure there's one that someone's gonna tell me, but yeah, for you to use Serendipity charges on prayer of healing, it has to be like a moderate amount of AoE damage being taken for it to be used. And I don't see it. I don't see the level 25 priest missing prayer of healing over circle of healing, right? So Serendipity being used on greater heal, I don't think can compare with living seed. Pardon me. So I think it's closer than what some would assume, especially because we don't know how much crit we're going to be able to get. Like, if a druid can get 20% crit and really fuel living seed procs, sure. The problem with living seed is almost kind of like the problem with prayer mending. You got to take damage and then hope that the follow-up healing doesn't override the living seed heal. Because living seed might get a partial heal on someone, but a lot of living seed's heal might lead to overhealing. Same thing with Serendipity. Like, there's no, like, just because you have Serendipity, you have a 60% cast time increase or decrease on greater heal, someone still could heal faster than you and lead to greater heal, part of it anyway, getting overhealed. But on paper, and I think in execution, Serendipity is a better rune than living seed. Now, the second argument, you might say, hey, so what if you don't use living seed? You can use Furious Storm Rage. This is a bit different. But I think Furious Storm Rage still isn't better than Serendipity because it's only a 12% chance to proc an instant healing touch. If that 12% was like 20%, I might be more inclined to say Furious Storm Rage is maybe at least on par with Serendipity. But the problem with Furious Storm Rage is, one, that it's a 12% chance, and two, you got to cast a non-healing ability to proc it, right? Now, this might not be a problem for smaller raids like in BFD. You could give everybody a rejuve and then get a couple rats off to try to fish for a proc. Because at that point, if everyone's not taking enough damage, the rejuve blanket might be enough, right? But still, you still have to not only not use a healing spell, but you have to target something else to to fish for a proc. Whereas Serendipity, your healing is fueling the more healing that you're going to do with greater heal. So I still think Serendipity is a better heal rune than both Furious Storm Rage and Living Seed. Survival of the fittest is a defensive, so it doesn't increase your healing. It makes you live longer, I guess, because it reduces all damage taken by 10%, and an additional 10% if you shift into bear form, because druids don't have very many defensive cooldowns. You can't make use of wild strikes as a resto because you're not going to be chilling in any of your animal forms. So, RIP. Maybe that would be a game changer if wild strikes could. If you didn't have to be in cat or any of the bear forms for wild strikes to be a thing, then resto would be in a different league. But unfortunately, that's not how that works. So I think after we compare these side by side, and like even if you compare, like we can quickly compare the talents. I'll reset these just so it's fair. Like I'll use the traditional setup that I use. So it was Holy Specialization maxed, Healing Focus maxed, Divine Fury maxed, Inspiration maxed, and then that floating talent point. You can either put in Holy Nova, you can put in Improved Healing, you can put in Spell Warding. I think putting it in Improved Healing for the reduced mana cost of Greater Heal and Heal, which is probably the spells you're going to be using, is the better option. And then for Resto, you put in Improved Mark of the Wild. I think here you put in Improved not Improved, but Nature's Focus to get the regrowth pushback protection. You get Reflection, which gives you the meditation talent. You put 1 in Insect Swarm, 1 in Subtlety, and then 1 in Improved Rejuvenation to get the 5% increased Rejuve. Obviously, there are other ways you can go. Like I said before, you can, we'll do this real quick. You can put it in, if you're really, really making use of Furious Storm Rage or your speedrun guild, this would be the setup. You would put 11 here to get Omen of Clarity to fish for the free clear casting procs, and then you would just put the remaining 5 in Improved Mark of the Wild. But again, you're missing out on Reflection, which is really big. You're missing out on Improved Rejuvenation, which is pretty decent. Like, you're missing out on a lot. So I don't know how much use this build is going to get. Maybe if you have multiple Resto Druids, who knows? But when you compare the talent builds side by side, Holy gets a crit amp for their spells, pretty good. They get spell pushback protection for their spells, pretty good. This is kind of the same thing as this. So only thing is, this takes 2 talent points. This takes 5, which is kind of not fair, to be quite honest with you. And this is really only for 1 spell. You're not going to really be casting Healing Touch, to my knowledge. Not going to really be casting it like that. So this is only for 1 spell, effectively, and it takes 5 talent points. This is for all of your spells, and it's only 2 talent points. It's not really fair. But you already got a 5% damage amp. You have a half a second shaved off of your heal and your greater heal. Really good. You have Inspiration, which is really, really strong. And then you have the reduced mana cost. In the Resto Druid, you have the party/raid power for increasing your Mark of the Wild, which should not be slept on. Pretty good. You have Reflection, which drives your mana focus, which is really for you. Insect Swarm is really, like I said, in my opinion, for tanking. Reducing the enemy chance to hit helps the tanks. So this can kind of be compared to Inspiration, because increasing the armor and reducing the enemy hit chance is almost the same thing. I think you'll probably get, on a consistency level, you'll probably get more uses out of this, because Insect Swarm is a damage spell. So if it misses, you just kind of wasted your GCD. Whereas like you can't really miss a heal, right? Like this procs off of getting a crit from Flash Heal, Greater Heal, or Prayer of Healing. This you have to target the boss and you have to hit him. Now at level 25, I don't think spell hit is going to be too much of a problem. I don't think so, right? I think I kind of went over this in one of my tank streams where I said at level 25, I don't know the hit cap at level 25. You know what I mean? Like boss mobs are going to be level 28. I would imagine that with the addition of that new weapon oil that gives you a spell hit chance and maybe a few select pieces that give hit, that would be enough. But just in case that's not enough, you still run the risk of missing your Insect Swarm, which means you got to reapply it, which means you're wasting another GCD. You see the snowball effect. So while Insect Swarm does give a pretty good defensive, I think it's less consistent, or it will probably be less consistent than Inspiration. And then the 5% increase on Rejuve, I think is just good. I think it's good. Resto Druids are pretty mana efficient, so you don't see a lot of mana utility spells. Kind of like Improved Healing. This is the mana cost, whereas this is just 5% flat. Like Rejuvenation is just a good spell, but when you compare the when you compare the talents side by side, this looks pretty even until you realize that Priest can still go into the discipline tree and pick up Improved Fort and Improved Power Word Shield. Improved Fort and Improved Mark of the Wild are basically the same thing, right? So those two things kind of cancel each other out. Having an Absorb already puts Priest at a different level than a Druid can be. Pardon me. Especially since they've now changed that when someone has Power Word Shield on them, they will still get Rage. They will still get the return from Righteous Fury. So having a stronger heal is kind of a no-brainer. So you got to look at it like that. Priests have more talent flexibility than the Druid. Druids can go get Omen of Clarity, but it comes at a big cost. It comes at an 11-point cost just to get a chance at getting clear casting procs, right? Whereas investing the talent, like if you reset this, if I do this, and then I go here, here, and here. Sure, I have to invest 5 points into a talent that really doesn't matter. Like Unbreakable Will isn't bad, but it doesn't really matter. But that's only a 5-point investment to really get to the bread and butter, which is these two. And then you still have one floating talent, which you can put into a healing focus to give you a small amount of pushback protection. So while you're missing out on the inspiration buff, which is pretty big, you're still getting two improved versions of two pretty important spells. So I think priests have, even if you don't want improved Power Word Shield, now you can max out your spell pushback protection and you can still get a reduced time on your other heals. So priests just have better flexibility in their talents, which I think is just by nature of the fact that they have 2 healing specs versus Restore only has 1. So gotta take that with a grain of salt. But I think after a side-by-side comparison, that's enough for me to kind of bump up Priest into all around the best, probably. Because they still can, even at the low level of 25, they can still do everything the other healers can at an effective level. A lot of that comes from having really good runes like Circle of Healing and Serendipity, but they still can do it. They can even though not nearly as efficiently, they can even play the blanket game with Renew. They can renew people just like a Druid can blanket rejuve. So Priest probably at the level 25 bracket will be the all-around best healer. Druid, I think, stays in the amazing tier. I think without Chain Heal, without Wind Fury, and with us not having the real tooltip of Healing Rain, let me just bring that back over here. Let me double check. Yeah, Healing Rain, like I said, it's definitely not going to be a 100-yard range, and it's definitely going to have a cooldown. It does heal party and raid, which is really good, but we don't know the mana cost. We don't know the cooldown. There's no Chain Heal. I think that just keeps Shaman at pretty good. There's no Riptide. You have to pick between getting Earth Shield or getting Shamanistic Rage. Like, there are just things that you kind of got to do. And Shamans are kind of mana hungry anyway. I think Shamanistic Rage does fix a lot of that, but Shamans are still pretty mana hungry. I think Disc Priest stays in pretty good. Where's the Priest one at? I keep moving these talent bills knowing that I'm going to reference them again. I don't know why I'm doing that to myself, but I think Disc Priest, let me just switch to the quote-unquote disc runes. I think Disc Priest might get bumped down to serviceable, only because if you really want to run like the full disc setup, let me just max it out here. I think it's 23, and I think that's what you would do. Now, you can do a couple of things with the priest thing here. I don't think it matters too much, but I'll show it real quick. So you're at 23. You have pretty much the important things you got. I would say you probably don't take Unbreakable Will. Let me redo that real quick, actually. You probably take one specialization. It's more useful than Unbreakable Will. So you take one specialization. To get down here, you could put 1 point in Silent Resolve, which reduces your threat. And to put that last floating talent point, you could put it... you could put it in Inner Fire. If there's AoE physical damage, I guess that works, kind of, whatever. I think you probably put it in Mental Agility, though. Reducing the mana cost on Power Word Shield, on Prayer of Mending, on Penance really isn't an instant spell. It's a channeled ability. So I don't think mental agility would work. Even though the first bolt of it is instant, I don't think it's classified as an instant spell. But Power Word Shield, Renew, if you spec into Prayer Mending, it should work with Prayer Mending. You probably get mental agility. This is another thing you do. The problem with this one is I still think Healing Focus is the better option because getting spell pushback protection on Penance is a really, really big deal. Like, Penance is a channeled ability, so if you lose a tick, like, it drastically reduces the effectiveness of Penance. And you're still going to be casting Heal, Flash Heal, Greater Heal. Like, you're still going to be casting the traditional priest spells. So I think spell pushback protection, to me, is a little bit better than 2% reduced mana cost. Just my opinion. Some people might feel differently. Some people might say, yo, I'm primarily shielding people anyway. Doesn't really matter. But I think this is the better route. Eugene Onufrag, what up, what up? Thank you for tuning in. But judging by the disc setup here. Yeah, I'm here. Can I not? Oh my God. Have I been speaking this whole time muted? No, I'm here. I'm good. You scared me. I'm here. What up? I think judging by the disc setup here, if you really want to run this particular setup, you come at a cost. It comes at a cost because you're not taking Serendipity. You're locked into Strength of Soul, which albeit is a good rune. Reducing the duration of Weakened Soul just lets you get more shields out. Really good rune, and it's by 4 seconds. What you mean, bro? You said don't say my name like that. I mean, bro, you made your name like that. You want me to call you E? I'll call you E Money. E Money for short. You got it. What was I saying? I think Strength of Soul, yeah, lets you shield the tank too. Like, it's a good rune. It makes you a focal point. It makes you a triage healer. It makes you a spot healer. Serendipity has more flexibility. I think Penance is a really strong single target heal. It just means you can't take circle healing, which is, at this level bracket, your only AoE heal. Power Word Barrier is a very strong rune. Other priests can bring Power Word Barrier. Now, if there are shadow priests who watch this back, they might say, yo, we're definitely not taking Power Word Barrier. We're taking Homunculi. I still don't know the effectiveness of Homunculi. I don't know how much damage the copies are going to do. I don't know anything about this rune. So if it's a super strong rune, then by all means, shadow priests are probably going to want to take it. But if it's just like I don't know, a sleeper rune, Barrier is the easy pick. Will Serendipity be good in SOD? Absolutely. You might have missed it a little bit ago, but I deemed Serendipity and Circle of Healing the driving force to why I think Disc Priest might be the all-around best, because they can put their hands in every single type of healing pot. Triage healing, blanket hot healing, healing while moving, single target healing. Like, they can do so many things that the other healers just can't do. So I think a large part of that is by virtue of Circle of Healing and Serendipity. But I mean, they still got it. I have to count it. But when it comes to being a Disc Priest, you're so locked into certain runes. I think it just kind of diminishes your power a little bit. Now, you good, bro? You good? I'm happy to repeat it. But yeah, I think overall for Disc, I think they can be pretty good. I think because they're still priests, right? I think you might could put them in serviceable. There are certain changes I would do. Let me see, where is it? Here we go. I would definitely make Strength of Soul affected by Penance, right? Now, that might sound a little crazy because you can't have one rune affecting another, but you got to remember, rogues also have a rune. They have the Flesh Wound affecting the Blade Dance rune or the Blade Foot rune. So runes can affect each other. I would put Penance on this Strength of Soul thing, and I would make it so that when you cast Penance, each bolt of Penance would reduce it. Maybe not by 4 seconds. That might be a little bit of overkill, but maybe by like 3 or 2 seconds. I would make Power Word Barrier, and this is a stretch. This might be like a reach, but I would make Power Word Barrier disc only, and not just Power Word Barrier. I think a couple of these runes need to be like spec specific. Like, you need to have X amount of talent points in this tree to use this rune type deal. But that could just be, that does diminish kind of what vanilla is. Like, vanilla was meant to create weird subspecs and stuff like that. So that might not be in the spirit of vanilla, and I can understand that. So I'll pull the reins back on that. But I think having Power Word Barrier just being able to be used by any priest is kind of nutty. But I think Disc is slightly strong enough if you use this setup to be out of the serviceable category, and it bumps it into pretty good, but not by much. Not by much. Because you still, like I said, without Prayer of Mending, which you could drop, like, because Power Word Barrier is accessible to all priests, you could drop Power Word Barrier for Prayer of Mending if someone else has it. Chances are you probably don't need more than like 2 Power Word Barriers in a raid group. Maybe like in a 10-man. In a 20-man or a 40-man, maybe 3, maybe 4. 4 I would put the limit on, but Prayer Mending you could drop. So I'll put it there. I'll put it in pretty good. Pretty good is where the priest will stay. Paladins. Paladins are great at single target. They bring great buffs. I think, like I said before, because the Kings is brought by Hunters. At the level 25 bracket, you can't max out Improved Wisdom. Like you can max out Improved Fort, you can max out Improved Mark of the Wild, you can max out Improved Powered Shield. You can't max out Improved Wisdom yet. You can max out Improved Blessing of Might, which I guess is a thing, but so can Paladins, which they're probably going to do. Beacon of Light is really good. Beacon of Light is really, really good. However, I still think it's not enough. Let me bring up the Paladin one real quick, just so we can have a frame of reference. I didn't really speak about the Horn of Lordaeron. Horn of Lordaeron is a really good buff too. It says it's exclusive with Blessing of Might. To me, that means the same Paladin can't buff you with Blessing of Might and Horn of Lordaeron, but I could be reading that wrong. That might mean that a person can only have one or the other, which I don't think they would do that like that, but maybe, who knows. But the way I read it is that the Paladin buffing can only give you either exclusive. It can only give you Horn of Lordaeron or Blessing of Might. That's the way I read that. But I didn't want to talk about it that much. But Paladin doesn't really have too much going for it in terms of improved buffs. You got to invest way too many talent points to get to Kings, so I don't think Kings is going to be a thing. And yeah, I think Paladins is serviceable, but I think it could be stronger. And Mage, I just think we just need to see more Mage, to be quite honest. I just think we need to see more Mage. I think Mage is in a contender for being pretty good because the channeled spot healer isn't a real thing that we have yet. Like, Paladins are good spot healers. Priests can be good spot healers. But I think when it comes to real spot healing, by virtue of the Regeneration Rune and Rewind Time, like, mages are really going to be good at that, at triage healing. But I need to see more. But that's really it, yo. This was a long stream. This is a minute. But that's really it for the healer tier list. I know a lot of this is speculation. None of this is stamped. Don't look at this as this is the definitive tier list. Obviously, everybody who this video comes across is going to have a difference of opinion. It's perfectly fine. I'm cool with it. I'm cool if when Season of Discovery launches and we're, like a month in and the tier lists have been set in stone, I'm cool with being 1,000% wrong. I could be 1,000% wrong in all of this. I'm good. I'm good on that. But I think just by judging with what we have to go off of, this is I'm 70-30 comfortable with what I have here. 70% comfortable, 30% I feel like maybe things could be bumped up or bumped down, but I think this is kind of where it stands. But that's really it for the stream. I've held y'all here for that much longer. I appreciate it if you catch this if you join me live, I appreciate it. If you catch it on a watch back, I appreciate that. If you like what you saw, or you go into my other streams or my other videos and you like what you see, consider liking and subscribing. Other than that, y'all been great. I've been Soul, and I'm out. Peace.